5-year-old Tayo Ademola clutched his toy truck and walked straight through a wall of armed men. Not around them. Through them. 6 guards. Hands inside jackets. Eyes that had ended careers and lives. They parted for a small boy in a yellow Ankara shirt without understanding why. The way every dangerous thing in nature instinctively moves for something it cannot categorize. Tayo stopped in front of the most feared man in the room and tilted his head. "My mom hides a picture of you in her budget files," he said, under miscellaneous. His eyes, sharp, unblinking, ancient for a 5-year-old's face, locked onto Kaite's. "Are you my dad?" The warehouse went so silent you could hear the Lagos heat. Seo Kitai, the man whose name rerouted shipping fleets, whose silence during negotiations meant someone was about to disappear, felt his entire world tilt sideways. Because those were his eyes looking back at him. Behind a tower of export crates, Jasmine Ademola pressed her, back against the metal, jaw tight, heart slamming. 5 years of running, 5 years of hiding, 5 years of survival. Destroyed by a 5-year-old and a toy truck. "I asked you a question," Tayo said, crossing his arms. "It's rude not to answer. If you're wondering how a forbidden romance in Seoul, a death threat, a midnight flight to Lagos, and one dangerously observant little boy led to this exact moment, subscribe right now, because we're just getting started. And comment where you're watching from. I want to say hello to every single one of you, just to know how far our story is already traveling." 5 years earlier, Seoul smelled like rain and ambition. Jasmine Ademola had arrived in Korea on a Tuesday in October with 2 suitcases, a government agricultural contract, and absolutely no interest in anything that wasn't work. She was there to solve a problem. Post-harvest losses along Korea's international grain export chain were bleeding millions from the bilateral trade agreement her organization had spent 3 years negotiating. She had 6 weeks to audit the logistics, restructure the cold storage protocols, and fly home to Lagos with a report that justified every kobo of her agency's budget. She was not there to notice anyone, but Seoul had other plans. It started at a port facility in Incheon, during a supply chain inspection she wasn't supposed to attend. Her Korean counterpart had canceled last minute, and Jasmine, who had never once in her professional life waited for someone else to open a door, had gone alone. She was 3 rows deep into a refrigerated storage unit, tablet in hand, cross-referencing temperature logs against spoilage data, when she became aware that the entire facility had gone quiet behind her. Not the natural quiet of an empty building, the specific loaded quiet of people making themselves invisible because something powerful had entered the room. She turned around. Seo Kite stood at the entrance of the storage unit in a charcoal suit that cost more than her monthly salary, 2 men flanking him at a respectful distance. He wasn't looking at her initially. He was scanning the facility the way men who own things scan what belongs to them, with the casual authority of someone who has never once questioned his right to be anywhere. Then his eyes found her. She was the only thing in the room that didn't belong to him. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything that surprised him, with complete stillness and a focus that felt like a physical weight. Jasmine turned back to her temperature logs. She heard his footsteps cross the concrete toward her. "This facility is closed for inspection," he said, in English so precise it had clearly been chosen deliberately. "I know," she replied without looking up. "I'm the one inspecting it." The silence that followed had texture. Then, quietly, like something that surprised even him, he laughed. That was how it started. Not with candlelight or grand gestures, with a refrigerated storage unit and a woman who didn't look up when he walked in. He found her fascinating the way people find things fascinating that refuse to behave according to their expectations. He sought her out after that, at trade dinners, at Port Authority meetings, at the kind of formal gatherings where she represented her government and he represented something that had no official name. He argued with her about logistics efficiency and listened to her counter-arguments with genuine attention. He asked her questions about Nigerian agricultural systems and actually remembered her answers. He looked at her, consistently, like she was the most interesting problem in every room. 6 weeks became 3 months. Jasmine told herself it was professional. Then she told herself it was casual. Then she stopped telling herself anything and simply let it be what it was. Something rare and warm and completely impossible. Growing, steadily in the space between two people who both knew better. She knew what he was. Seoul whispered his name the way cities whisper about weather, as something unavoidable, something that reshaped everything it touched. She had seen the way rooms reorganized themselves around his presence. She understood, with the clear-eyed pragmatism that had carried her from Lagos to a government contract in Korea, that Seokite existed in a world that operated by rules designed to protect people like him and devour everyone else. She knew all of this. She stayed anyway. For 4 months, she stayed. The morning she found out she was pregnant, it was raining. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in her Seoul apartment and looked at the test in her hand for a very long time. Her mind, which had solved post-harvest inefficiencies across 4 continents, which had negotiated with ministry officials and port authorities, and men twice her age who underestimated her consistently and always, regretted it. Her mind went completely, uselessly still. She told herself she would tell him that evening. She told herself they would figure it out together. She told herself that the man who remembered every argument she'd made about cold chain logistics, who looked at her like that, who laughed only when she said something, that man would not become someone else when the stakes changed. She never got the chance to find out. The envelope arrived that afternoon. No stamp. No return address. Slid under her apartment door while she was still sitting on the bathroom floor, recalibrating her entire life. Inside was a single photograph. Her, leaving Kite's building 2 nights ago. And 4 words printed in clean, cold type beneath it. Leave tonight. Don't return. And below that, in handwriting she recognized from documents she had seen on Kite's desk during late nights, when work and something warmer had blurred together at the edges, his personal cipher, his mark. Her hands didn't shake. That surprised her. She'd always assumed that the moment her world ended, she would shake. Instead, she went very calm and very clear, the way she got before the most important negotiations of her career. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the handwriting. She looked at the test still sitting on the bathroom counter. She made a decision. She packed 1 suitcase. She withdrew every kobo of accessible cash. She called no one. Not Kite, not her handler at the agency, not her mother in Ibadan who would have asked too many questions she didn't have answers for. She left her government laptop on the kitchen counter, her remaining clothes in the wardrobe, and 6 months of a life she had not planned and could not keep. She was on a flight out of Incheon by midnight. She did not look back. She had learned early that looking back was a luxury that belonged to people who had no one depending on them. And from that night forward, she had someone depending on her. She just didn't know yet how much of his father he would turn out to be. Lagos received her the way Lagos receives everyone who comes home changed, without ceremony, without judgment, with the particular noise and heat and forward momentum of a city that has no patience for people who stand still. Jasmine did not stand still. She built, quietly, systematically, with the same relentless focus she had applied to every problem in her professional life. She started a post-harvest agricultural export consultancy from the 2nd bedroom of her aunt's house in Lekki, Tayo sleeping in a carrier on her chest during early client calls, growing steadily heavier as her client list grew longer. She registered the company when Tayo was 4 months old. She landed her first international contract when he was 8 months old. By the time he took his first steps, directly toward her open laptop, which he attempted to type on with focused seriousness, she had 3 government partnerships and a reputation in West African agricultural export circles that had nothing to do with anything that happened in Seoul. Tayo grew up inside her work the way children of driven women grow up, absorbing everything, questioning everything, treating the world like a puzzle that existed specifically for him to solve. By 3, he was identifying cargo truck models by sound. By 4, he had strong opinions about warehouse organization that were, Jasmine admitted privately, usually correct. By 5, he wore his small Ankara shirts to her client meetings and sat quietly in the corner taking what he called notes in a notebook that contained, as far as she could decipher, a combination of invented symbols and surprisingly accurate diagrams of storage layouts. He was, in every observable way, his father's son. Jasmine had exactly 1 photograph of Kite. She knew she should have deleted it 5 years ago. She had not. It lived in a folder on her work laptop labeled Q3 Budget Miscellaneous. A folder she had never opened in front of anyone. A folder she told herself she kept for reasons she never examined too closely. Tayo had apparently examined them for her. She had built something real here. A company. A home. A life that was safe and stable and entirely hers. She had stopped flinching at Korean accents in international business calls. She had stopped checking the door twice before she slept. She had almost stopped dreaming about rain and a refrigerated storage unit, and a man who had looked at her like she was the most interesting problem in the room. Then the SEO syndicate acquired the West African coastal shipping routes. The notification came through an industry newsletter she read every Thursday morning over coffee, Tayo beside her eating toast and reading her tablet, because he had opinions about the agricultural commodities market that she had stopped arguing with. She read the headline twice. Then she read it a third time. SEO Maritime Holdings expands Continental African Logistics Network. Lagos Port, partnership confirmed. She set her coffee down very carefully. Tayo looked up from the tablet. "Mom," he said, reading her face with that unsettling accuracy he had inherited from a man he had never met. "Your cortisol levels look elevated." "Finish your toast," she said. She spent 3 days trying to find alternative shipping routes. There were none that didn't add cost her margins couldn't absorb or delays her contracts couldn't survive. The SEO network was too thorough, too well priced, too strategically positioned. Someone had built it that way deliberately, to be unavoidable. On the 4th day, she got the call that his representatives would be conducting a personal inspection of their Lagos port partnerships, including her export facility. She had 48 hours. She spent them preparing her warehouse documentation and telling herself that Seoul was a big operation, that Kite himself would never come, that she was catastrophizing, that 5 years was a long time, and dangerous men had more important things to do than personally inspect West African cold storage facilities. She was still telling herself this when his convoy pulled through her warehouse gates, and the entire facility went silent, and she looked up from her clipboard and saw him. Older. Harder. More dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the 2 armed men at his shoulders, or the 3 more stationed at her exits. And standing 4 feet in front of him, toy truck in hand, head tilted at that particular angle, Tayo. Kite's men cleared the floor in under a minute after Tayo asked his question. Not because Kite gave an order. He gave no orders. He simply looked at his second-in-command with eyes that communicated everything, and the room emptied. Jasmine came out from behind the crates because there was nowhere left to go. She walked toward her son slowly, her chin up, her eyes steady, every survival instinct she had honed over 5 years, pulling itself into a single line of composure that she wore like armor. She put her hand on Tayo's shoulder. He leaned into her slightly without breaking his gaze from Kitae's face. Kitae looked at her. 5 years lived inside that look. 5 years of something she couldn't name and refused to examine in this moment, in this warehouse, with her son standing between them like a question mark made flesh. Tayo, she said quietly, go to Mr. Emmanuel's office. Now. Tayo evaluated this request. He looked at Kitae. He looked at his mother. He looked at Kitae again with the expression of someone filing information for later analysis. Okay, he said finally. Then, to Kitae, with the grave courtesy of someone who had been raised to be polite, even in catastrophic situations, we'll finish this conversation. He walked away, shoes precise on the concrete floor. The warehouse was very quiet. Jasmine. Kitae's voice was low and controlled and cost him something. She could hear what it cost him. Don't, she said. 5 years. I know how long it's been. You ran. His jaw tightened. You took my ledgers and you vanished and you have a son. My son. He stepped forward. You had him and you said nothing. 5 years, Jasmine. Something hot moved through her chest. I had him, she said, her voice precise and sharp as a blade, because I was 29 years old and pregnant and I received a death threat with your handwriting on it telling me to leave the country and not come back. Kitae went absolutely still. What? Don't. Her voice didn't shake. She had practiced this conversation in her own head for 5 years and she had promised herself it would not shake. Don't stand in my warehouse and perform shock for me. I saw your mark on that note, Kitae. Your cipher. The same one you used on internal documents. So don't. I never sent you anything. The certainty in his voice stopped her. I spent 3 months trying to find you, he said, each word deliberate. I turned Seoul upside down. I called in favors from people who do not give favors. Your government contract had been terminated without explanation. Your apartment was cleared out. You were simply gone. Something moved behind his eyes. And my ledgers were gone with you. My underboss told me you were a corporate plant. That you ran when your cover was blown. Jasmine stared at him. Your underboss, she said slowly. Park Jun-ho. The name landed between them like something dropped from a great height. She had met Park Jun-ho exactly twice. The second time, he had looked at her across a dinner table with eyes that were perfectly pleasant and completely empty, the way the eyes of genuinely dangerous people are empty. Not from absence of intelligence, but from total absence of conscience. She had catalogued him automatically, the way she catalogued every threat, and then filed him away as Kitae's problem, not hers. She understood now that she had been his problem. He wrote the note, she said. Not a question. The pieces were assembling themselves with the cold efficiency of a logistics audit, each one clicking into place with horrible clarity. He used your cipher to write it. He told you I stole your ledgers to make sure you'd never look for me as the mother of my child. Kitae's voice was barely controlled. He knew. He must have known I was pregnant. Jasmine pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Or suspected. He saw me as a liability. Someone making you soft, Kitae said. And the word came out like something that had been sitting in him for a long time, waiting to be understood. He said it once, that I was making decisions differently, that I was distracted. His eyes closed briefly. I thought he was talking about the Busan deal. He had been talking about her. Park Jun-ho had looked at the most feared man in Seoul's underworld and seen something more dangerous than any rival syndicate. A man in the early stages of choosing something over his empire, and he had acted with the swift, surgical efficiency of someone who understood that the easiest way to remove an influence was to make the man himself do the removing. He had handed Kitae a story, a corporate spy, stolen ledgers, a woman who had used him and run, and he had handed Jasmine a death threat in Kite's own hand, wrapped around a message so clean and final there was no reason to question it. He had separated them completely, from both sides, in a single night. Jasmine looked at Kite across the silent warehouse floor. This man she had fled. This man she had hidden from. This man whose eyes her son had inherited, along with his stillness and his unsettling capacity to read every room he entered, and felt something enormous and complicated move through her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. That was a country she would need a map to reach, and she was not there yet. But the wall she had built out of that one terrible night, the wall she had mortared with 5 years of survival and anger and the quiet grief of a woman who had loved something she believed had tried to destroy her, that wall had just developed a crack so fundamental that no amount of composure was going to hold it. Kite was looking at her the way he had looked at her in Seoul, like she was the most important problem in the room, like she was, underneath everything that had broken and calcified and scarred between them, still the most interesting thing he had ever encountered. "I want to meet my son," he said quietly, properly. From the direction of Emmanuel's office, small shoes clicked deliberately on concrete. Closer, closer, with the specific rhythm of a 5-year-old who had decided he had waited long enough. Tayo appeared in the doorway, notebook in hand, and looked between them with ancient, assessing eyes. "You've stopped yelling," he observed. "That's progress." He walked forward and positioned himself equidistant, between them with the authority of a UN mediator. "I have follow-up questions for both of you. I've made a list." He opened his notebook. "We should probably sit down. This is going to take a while." Kite made a sound that was almost a laugh. Jasmine pressed her hand over her mouth. Her son looked up at both of them, pen ready, completely serious. "I'll start with you," he told Kite, "since Mom already knows most of my questions." He tapped the page. "Do you know what post-harvest cold chain logistics is? Because that's what we do here. And if you're my dad, you should probably understand the family business." In the ruins of 5 years of running, in the wreckage of a lie that had cost them both everything, in a Lagos export warehouse that smelled like cassava flour and sea air, and the particular future that had just refused to stay buried. Seo Kite crouched down to his son's eye level for the first time and said, "Teach me?" Kite did not leave. This was not entirely surprising. Men who commanded international shipping networks and made port authorities nervous did not typically accept dismissal gracefully. What surprised Jasmine was the way he didn't leave, not with pressure or ultimatums, but with the quiet, immovable patience of someone who had spent 5 years learning how to wait. He canceled his remaining Lagos appointments. He relocated his operation to a hotel 12 minutes from her warehouse. He sent no demands, made no declarations. He simply appeared the next morning at her facility gate with 2 of his men, a container of jollof rice from a restaurant Tayo had apparently recommended during their cold chain logistics conversation, and the specific expression of a person attempting something they have no prior experience with and refusing to be embarrassed about it. Tayo let him in immediately. Jasmine stood at her office window and watched her son lead the most feared man in Seoul's underworld on a personally narrated tour of her export facility, pointing out structural inefficiencies in the loading bay organization with a conviction that made 2 of Kite's guards exchange glances. Kite walked beside him with his hands clasped behind his back and his full attention on everything Tayo said, asking questions that were, she noticed despite herself, genuinely intelligent ones. By the end of the first week, Tayo had produced a written assessment of Kitai's suitability as a paternal figure, organized into categories. She found it on the kitchen table one evening, weighted down by his water bottle. Category 1, Intellectual Compatibility. Adequate. He understood my cold chain comments and asked a good follow-up question about humidity variance. Category 2. Emotional availability. Developing. He looks at Mom like he's worried she'll disappear. That's probably good. Category 3. Commitment level. High. He canceled his Seoul meetings. I checked his calendar. Jasmine stared at the last line for a long moment. How, she said, when Tayo appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas. Did you access his calendar? He left his phone on the warehouse table, Tayo said, with the serenity of someone who saw no ethical issue whatsoever with this. There was no password. He'd turned it off entirely. He paused. He said he does that when he wants people to trust him. I looked it up. It's a negotiation technique. Jasmine stared at her son. You looked that up? I wanted to understand his methods, Tayo said reasonably. Know your people, Mom. You taught me that. She was not ready to trust Kitai. She knew the difference between a man who was sorry and a man who had changed, and she was not yet certain which one she was dealing with. But she was beginning, against every instinct she had sharpened over 5 years of survival, to consider the question. She was still considering it when things started to go wrong. In Seoul, Park Junho received the report on a Wednesday. It was thorough. His people were always thorough. And it told him 3 things he did not want to know. First, that Kite had identified the West African woman from the Incheon facility. Second, that there was a child. Third, that Kite had not left Lagos. Park Junho sat with this information for approximately 4 minutes. Then he made a call to a number that did not exist in any of his registered contacts, and he said 4 words to the man who answered. The Lagos problem. Now. He had built too much on the architecture of that one night 5 years ago. Kite's hardening, his return to the kind of ruthlessness that built empires rather than dismantling them. A woman and a child in Lagos threatened all of it. More precisely, they threatened Park Junho's position at the center of an organization that would not need him nearly so much if its leader developed other priorities. He was not a man who accepted being made redundant. The first sign was small enough to dismiss. A delivery truck that took a wrong turn through Jasmine's farm management site in Ogun State, driving too slowly, stopping too long near the storage perimeter before reversing out. Emmanuel noticed it and mentioned it to Jasmine, who noted it and moved on. She had a logistics audit to complete and a 5-year-old who had begun insisting on attending her morning briefings because, in his assessment, her team's communication protocols needed restructuring. The second sign was harder to dismiss. A fire, small and quickly contained, in the generator shed of her secondary warehouse in Apapa. The fire investigator called it electrical. Jasmine looked at the origin point and felt something cold move through her professional instincts. She had spent a decade auditing facility safety, and she knew what electrical fires looked like. This one had a different geometry entirely. She said nothing to Kite. She told herself she was being cautious, the honest part of her, the part that had learned to read. Danger the way she read logistics reports, with ruthless honesty about what the data actually said, knew she was protecting something, not herself. The fragile, unnamed thing growing in the warehouse conversations and the morning briefings and the evenings when Kitai sat on her office floor with Tayo between them, losing chess games deliberately at first, and then, as Tayo's play improved, genuinely. She was protecting the possibility of it. She didn't want to hand it back to violence before she'd decided what it was. The third sign did not give her the option of silence. She was driving back from the Ogun site when a car came out of a junction at a speed that was not an accident. It clipped her rear panel hard enough to spin her across the road. She came to a stop in the red dirt shoulder with her hands locked on the wheel and her heart in her throat, and by the time she turned to look, the other car was already gone. She sat there for 30 seconds. Then she called Kitai. He, arrived in 19 minutes with 4 men and an expression she had not seen on him before. Not his boardroom stillness or his careful patience with Tayo, or even the rawness she had glimpsed during their warehouse unraveling. This was something older and colder. The face of a man who understood exactly what a car at that speed from that angle was designed to do, and what it meant that it had happened to her. He opened her door, checked her over with hands that were careful and efficient, and when he was satisfied she was physically unhurt, he straightened and made a call in rapid Korean that she didn't need to translate. She understood the tone. "Tayo," she said immediately. "Already handled. My men are at his school." She let out a breath that had been sitting in her lungs for 19 minutes. "It's Junho," Kite said quietly. "I know." He looked at her. "How long have you known something was wrong?" She met his eyes. "The truck at Ogun was 3 days ago." Something moved. Across his face. Not anger. Something more complicated than anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at the road where the other car had been, then back at him. "Because I'm not used to telling anyone." The silence between them held that admission carefully. "You don't have to handle everything alone anymore," he said. "That's what I'm trying to show you. If you'll let me." She had no answer for that yet, but she got out of the car and walked with him to his. And that was its own kind of answer. He moved them that evening, Jasmine, Tayo, and Emmanuel, to a compound 40 minutes outside Lagos that looked from the outside like a modest agricultural research facility, and from the inside like something designed by a person who understood that security and comfort were not mutually exclusive. Tayo approved of the library. He was less approving of the 3 armed guards stationed outside his bedroom door, whom he attempted to recruit into a board game rotation before Jasmine redirected him toward sleep. "Are we in danger?" he asked her, with the directness she had both raised and inherited. She looked at her son, his father's eyes, her own jawline, some entirely original combination of them both in the steady way he held her gaze, and waited. "Kite is handling it," she said. Tayo processed this. "Do you trust him?" The question sat between them in the quiet room. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. Tayo nodded, as though this was a satisfactory progress report. "He checks on us," he said, pulling his blanket up. "Every hour. I've been counting." He paused. "That's not nothing, Mom." She kissed her son's forehead and turned off the light and stood in the hallway for a long moment, thinking about a man who turned his phone off entirely when he wanted someone to trust him. The ambush came at dawn. They should not have been at the warehouse. Kite had given explicit instructions. The safe house was secure. There was no logical reason to break protocol. But at 2 in the morning, her facility manager had called in a panic about a refrigeration system failure across 6 units of export produce, and the loss calculation had hit her in the chest like a physical thing. 5 years of building. 43 small farmers whose livelihoods ran through her cold chain. She told Kaite she was going. He did not try to stop her. He simply came with her. They arrived at 4:30. His men swept the perimeter and reported clear. Jasmine went directly to the refrigeration control room, her hands moving across the systems with the fluency of someone who had personally installed half of them. Tayo was asleep in the back seat of the car with Emmanuel. That was the only thing, afterward, she was entirely grateful for. The first shot took out the security light above the main entrance at 5:12. Kite had her behind the control room door before the sound finished echoing, his body between her and the entrance, his phone already calling. His men. She heard the exchange outside, controlled at first, then escalating, then the specific sound of a situation becoming something larger and worse than anticipated. "How many entrances?" Kite said, low and fast. Her mind snapped into the architecture of the building she had designed, audited, and expanded over 4 years. 7. 3 loading bays on the north side. The center one has a compromised lock, 11 seconds to force from outside. 2 personnel doors on the east, both alarmed. The south exit opens into the generator yard with a connecting gate to the neighboring compound. West side has the refrigeration exhaust vents. Large enough? For me to reach the electrical panel in the adjacent unit. If I cut the main power, the backup systems trip the exterior floods. Every light on the property fires simultaneously. They'll be completely exposed. Kite looked at her in the near dark. You'd be outside. I'd be in the vent system. They won't know the layout. Jasmine, I built this facility, she said. I know every meter of it. You know how to fight. I know where. She held his gaze. Trust me. Something shifted in his face, the careful armor giving way to something that had decided she was worth the risk. Go, he said. Straight there, don't stop. She went. She made it to the west wall in 40 seconds, staying low, cutting between crate columns the way she had walked this floor 1,000 times before. The vent access panel was exactly where she knew it would be. Chest height, 4 bolts, a handle she had personally replaced 18 months ago during a maintenance audit. She grabbed it, pulled. It didn't move. She pulled again, harder, and felt the resistance of something sealed by humidity and time and 6 months of coastal air working rust into every gap. The sounds behind her were getting louder, gunfire in controlled bursts, boots on concrete, and underneath it all, Kite's voice directing his men, still, steady, still level. Then she heard a sound that was not steady at all. A grunt, sharp, involuntary. She did not let herself stop. She braced both feet against the wall, gripped the handle with both hands and pulled with everything she had. Her teeth locked, her arms burning. 5 years of building this company and raising a son and surviving alone, channeled into a single desperate moment. The panel tore open with a shriek of rust, and she fell backward 2 steps, caught herself, and dove in. The vent system was tight and black, and smelled like motor oil and old metal. She was 2 junctions in when she heard it. Movement behind her. Not the distant sounds of the warehouse floor. Movement inside the vent. Close. Deliberate. Someone had seen her go in. She moved faster, abandoning any attempt at silence, navigating on pure memory in total darkness. Left at the first junction, straight through the humidity valve housing, right where the duct dropped 6 inches toward the adjacent unit. Behind her the sounds grew closer. A man who did not know this layout but was moving fast regardless, guided by sound, by the faint scrape of her shoes on metal, by the particular fury of someone who understood exactly what she was trying to do. She counted junctions. 1, 2. The drop. She hit it wrong in the dark. Caught her shoulder hard on the lower edge, felt something tear, kept moving. 3. The panel junction. Her hands found the main breaker box casing by touch. The small dent on the upper left corner she had made herself with a poorly aimed torque wrench 2 years ago. She found the breaker. Her hands were shaking. Behind her, close enough now that she could hear breathing, a beam of phone light swept the duct and caught the back of her legs. She pulled the breaker. The building went black for 3 seconds. Inside the duct. Outside. Everywhere. Total and absolute. Then, every exterior flood on the property blazed to life simultaneously, and even through the metal walls of the vent she felt the quality of the sounds outside change completely. The controlled aggression of men moving through darkness collapsed into the sudden, catastrophic exposure of men caught in noon-bright light with nowhere left to hide. In the dark of the duct, the man behind her had stopped moving. She didn't wait to find out what he decided to do next. She found the nearest exit panel by touch, drove her torn shoulder into it, and spilled out into the generator yard. The fight outside was already turning. Kite's remaining men repositioned and ready, the invaders scrambling in the merciless light, the tactical ground shifting fast beneath the brutal advantage she had handed them. It was over in under 2 minutes from the moment the floods fired. The quiet that followed had a different texture than the silence before, the particular stillness of something finished. Kite came around the corner of the building and stopped when he saw her. He crossed the yard in 10 strides. He looked at her face, her hands, her torn shoulder. Checking. The same efficient care as the roadside, the same hands that were careful when everything else about him was not. She looked at him. There was blood on his left side, dark against the charcoal of his jacket. A graze along the ribs, not deep, but real. The proof of a body that had placed itself between her and the entrance and stayed there while she crawled through the dark. "You're hit," she said. "I'm fine." "Kire?" "I'm fine," he said again, and the way he said it made clear that fine was not the point. The point was that he had known the risk and made a different calculation. The point was that he was standing here. He pulled her against him and held on. She stood inside that for a long moment. This man who had come to her warehouse at dawn without argument, who had taken a hit while she crawled through darkness and trusted her completely when everything in his nature probably screamed to keep her beside him. She put her hands against his back, careful of his ribs, and held on too. "Junho," she said into his shoulder. "Handled," he said. "My people in Seoul moved an hour ago." A pause. "It's done." She pulled back enough to look at him. His face in the floodlight was exhausted and certain and looking at her the way he always looked at her. Like she was the most important thing in every room. Like she was, underneath everything that had broken between them and everything they had just survived together, still the only thing worth holding. "All of it," he said quietly. "I'm done." He told her 3 days later, sitting in the safe house kitchen while Tayo reorganized the pantry by category and expiration date because he had assessed the existing system as inefficient. He was stepping down from the syndicate, not restructuring, not delegating, dismantling his operational role entirely and transferring control to the network of legitimate holdings he had spent 3 years quietly building. The ones he had constructed, he told her without drama, for the specific possibility of this moment. "You built a legitimate exit before you found us," she said. "I built it because I intended to find you." He looked at her steadily. "I told you. I never stopped." She thought about a man in Seoul turning over every resource he had, waiting 6 months for the right merger to surface a name he recognized on an attorney filing. She thought about a phone left unlocked on a warehouse table. She thought about dawn in a generator yard and arms that held on even with a graze along the ribs. "What will you do?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then, with the precision of someone who had thought about this for a very long time, he said, "There are significant post-harvest loss problems in the West African agricultural export chain. The right cold chain infrastructure investment could change the economics for thousands of smallholder farmers. I've been reading your published reports." Jasmine went very still. "All of them," he added. "I found them 2 years ago, still searching for you. I read everything you'd published." His expression was completely serious. "You're right about the cold chain gaps. The investment case is strong. I have the capital and the logistics infrastructure." A pause. "You have the expertise and the relationships." From the pantry, Tayo spoke without turning around. "That's a merger," he said, moving a tin of tomatoes to its correct location with satisfaction. "I've been waiting for one of you to notice." Jasmine looked at Kai-tae. Kai-tae looked at Jasmine. Something moved between them that was not quite a smile, but was clearly on its way to becoming one. He reached across the kitchen table and put his hand over hers. Not a claim, not a demand. Just a hand, placed carefully, waiting to see what she decided to do with it. She turned her palm up. "One step," she said, "then another. That's all I'm asking." he said. Tayo closed the pantry with the quiet satisfaction of a completed project, turned around and looked at both of them with his ancient, assessing eyes. He pulled his notebook from his back pocket, uncapped his pen, and made a note with the gravity of someone recording a significant development. Progress, he said. I'll update the tracker. Outside the safe house windows, Lagos was waking up. The noise, the heat, the relentless forward momentum of a city that had no patience for people who stood still. Jasmine sat in her kitchen with her son's pen scratching across paper and the hand of a man she was learning, slowly and carefully, and with every survival instinct she possessed fully engaged, to trust again. She had run from this city 5 years ago with one suitcase and a secret, and the clarity of a woman who understood that staying meant destruction. She was still here. She had built something real. She had raised someone extraordinary. She had survived and built and held on. And now, in the ruins of everything Park Jun-ho had constructed to keep them apart, something was growing again. Not rebuilt. Something entirely new. Something that had Tayo's handwriting in it, and Kitae's infrastructure capital, and her cold chain expertise, and the particular stubborn momentum of two people who had already proven they could survive losing each other. She thought they might be even better at surviving together. Kitae's thumb moved slowly across her knuckles. Tayo closed his notebook and looked at both of them. Good, he said simply. He pulled his chair closer to the table, picked up his pen, and opened to a fresh page. Now, he said, can we talk about the merger? I have a proposed organizational structure and I want both of you to review it before I finalize the charts. Kitae looked at Jasmine. Jasmine looked at Kitae. Our son, she said quietly, is going to run the world. Obviously, Kitae said. And this time, he let himself smile fully, the way he only ever did with the two of them. He already runs us. And in the warm Lagos morning, with a 5-year-old reorganizing their future on graph paper between them, neither of them argued with that. If you made it this far, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to every single one of you, just to know how far our story is already traveling.